actively working for peace, security, dignity for the Israeli people and the Palestinian people.
We will continue to work to avoid a wider conflict in the region. But we will take all necessary actions to defend the United States, our interests, and our people.
Well, at this point, I'm undecided. I am still looking at the candidates very deeply just to see who best resonates with what I'm looking for.
Hello, I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. President Biden has unveiled a new executive order targeting Israeli settlers in the West Bank. It allows the U.S. to impose new sanctions on those who engage in violence against Palestinians or displace them from their homes. Israeli politicians and government officials could also be subjected to those same sanctions. This move comes as Biden faces mounting criticism over his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us now. Nancy, it's great to see you. Tell us about this executive order that has already penalized 4 individuals. Who are they, and should we expect the government to sanction Israeli officials as well?
There's certainly the possibility, Weijia, that the number of sanctioned individuals could grow. Right now, it is 4 individuals, West Bank settlers, Israelis, who the White House accuses of behaving with violence towards Palestinians in the West Bank. One of them, for example, the administration says incited a riot, set vehicles and buildings on fire, and that it led to the death of 1 Palestinian. Another assaulted Palestinian farmers. Why is this important? Because the president has been making the case that a 2-state solution is really the only way to prevent violence and tension long term between Israel and the Palestinians. That's been rejected by the Israeli prime minister. And the U.S. really wants to see the Israeli government crack down more than it has on these West Bank Israeli settlers who they feel have been targeting Palestinians. And so what this executive order does is it essentially freezes any U.S. assets that these individuals might have, and it prevents anyone in the U.S. essentially from doing business with them. And these 4 people are not, are not big fish. They're not necessarily high on the totem pole, but it's definitely meant to send a message that other individuals, perhaps higher ranking individuals, could be next if they continue to target Palestinians.
And as we mentioned, this comes amid mounting pressure for the Biden administration to try to use its influence to get Israel to scale back its offensive. And I wonder if you think this is going to do it for those who are criticizing Biden.
I think it's one piece of the puzzle. I think it's no accident that this got announced today, just as the president was heading to Michigan, a state with a relatively large Arab American population, a state where we know the Biden administration has tried to sit down with Arab American leaders with mixed success. And so this is definitely meant to send a signal to those voters in that pivotal swing state, but other Arab Americans around the country, that he does care about the plight of the Palestinians, and that this is one more piece of evidence of that. But it's clear that he's got a lot more work to do. The White House announced today that more administration officials will be hitting the road starting in the next few days to sit down, or at least to try to sit down, with Arab American leaders. We know that in some cases, those meetings have been rejected because the leaders and their communities felt so strongly about U.S. support for Israel in this ongoing war.
Yeah, that is going to be some pretty tricky ground for the president to navigate. Of course, many of those Arab Americans are calling for a ceasefire. The administration is concerned, has always been, that this conflict could widen. But we also know, we just heard from Secretary Austin today, that it will defend the U.S. and its troops especially. So what can you tell us about the strikes that have been approved in response to the Jordan drone strike that killed 3 U.S. service members?
So what we know is that a series of strikes have been approved that would take place potentially over several days. We don't know exactly when those strikes would start, but we're told that that they would take place in Iraq and Syria, and that it would be targeting outposts that have links to Iran, basically militias linked to Iran that are believed to be responsible for the attack on the base in Jordan that killed 3 American service members and wounded about 40. Now, the fact that the administration is signposting this, is basically saying, hey, we're going to do this, is typically something that it does when it wants to try to minimize casualties, wants to make sure that those that could be targeted can get out of the way if they need to, because the administration is interested in sending a message. It is not necessarily interested in starting a larger conflict with Iran, like you said. And so they're trying to find this sort of middle ground. It's tricky. What the Secretary of Defense said today is that this is going to be a multi-tiered approach. And so even once you do see these strikes that are supposed to be carried out, that doesn't mean that it's the end of their efforts to retaliate for what was done to these American soldiers.
All right, we will be watching. Thank you so much, Nancy Cortez. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
There's just 2 days until the South Carolina Democratic primary. The Biden campaign has been pushing to win the support of Black voters there. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian has the latest from the Palmetto State.
Black voters could be critical in the upcoming Democratic primary here in South Carolina. We spoke with a few pastors here at this predominantly African-American church about some of their concerns and what they're hearing from voters as they try to encourage them to go to the polls.
I am concerned about the lack of enthusiasm. I am concerned that so many of our community, and I understand, feeling that some of the issues that are more relevant to us are not being addressed.
We don't have an option. We don't have an option. Trump certainly isn't. Nikki Haley would certainly be better than Trump, but has Joe Biden been perfect? Absolutely not.
And I think the sentiments in our community is we do desire for him to return to office, but we need for a little bit more execution and work done for policies and procedures that we're looking at, and that's a concern in our community.
President Biden has made several stops in the Palmetto State over the last few weeks, including visits to black churches. You'll recall the president won about 60% of the black vote back in 2020, which helped propel him to victory in the primary and resuscitated his campaign. But some polls have indicated that support among African-American voters may be softening. So this primary in South Carolina is being viewed as a critical test. Early voting is already underway across the state, including mobile options where folks can simply drive up in their car and cast a ballot. This time around, the president faces challengers Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson. The president is not expected back in South Carolina for the primary, but the vice president is expected here Friday to make a final push.
Nicole Killian, thank you. President Biden is campaigning in Michigan today following his high-profile endorsement from the United Auto Workers Union. We're joined by a senior spokesperson for his campaign. Next, you're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. President Biden traveled to Michigan today to meet with members of the United Auto Workers Union. This trip comes just days after he received the union's high-profile endorsement. Biden narrowly flipped Michigan in 2020 after Trump carried the state back in 2016. The former president is also vying for union support. Yesterday, Trump met with the Teamsters president to discuss immigration. The union backed both President Biden and Hillary Clinton instead of Trump the 2 previous times he ran for office. Kevin Munoz joins us now. He is a senior spokesperson for President Biden's reelection campaign. Kevin, it's always great to see you. I'm looking at an email where you blasted the former president's, quote, bad attempt at salvaging union support after that meeting yesterday. Why are you so confident that President Biden is going to continue to win union endorsements?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Weija. Hello from Wilmington. We're really excited that the president was able to come to Michigan today to talk to some of the 130,000 UAW Michiganders in the state about the stakes of this election when it comes to working people. When you look at Donald Trump's record, it is one of selling out the working class on behalf of Wall Street. And Joe Biden is proud to be the most pro-labor president. And this was a great trip following his historic visit to a picket line, the first time the sitting president has ever done that. And we're going to continue to talk about how this agenda is delivering for union members, including creating jobs here at home instead of shipping them over to China.
And Kevin, I want to point to a photo of a truck that was parked near today's UAW event because Michigan, as you mentioned, is home to many members of that particular union, but it's also home to the largest Arab American, Muslim American population in the country. And this sign reads Genocide Joe. It references the death toll in Gaza. And I wonder what the campaign is doing to try to reach that community and try to navigate the passion and the anger that we are seeing boiling over.
Well, look, the president first and foremost treats this issue as a commander-in-chief, and he absolutely recognizes the challenge, the difficulty, and the pain that so many abroad and so many here at home feel when it comes to this issue. We know that the White House has already announced some steps building on the work they've been doing to engage with Arab elected officials and other leaders in their communities to travel to Michigan, to talk to them about the issues that will define this election. Ultimately, this election is going to be won by earning the support of the coalition that sent Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the White House in the first place. And we're going to be doing that work and talking to every constituency throughout this cycle.
Did the president sit down with any Arab American leaders today while he was in Michigan?
It was really important for the president to come after that endorsement, after him joining the picket line to visit with UAW workers and talk about the stakes of this election. He was also able to visit a Black-owned business, talk to some Michiganders about that. This is the first of many trips. I think we're really encouraged by the fact that, the White House is sending some senior officials over to Michigan to talk to stakeholders in the community, and we'll be continuing to visit and talking to folks throughout this cycle.
I want to, as we mentioned earlier, the president was able to flip Michigan in 2020. And I'm sure you already have these numbers memorized, but he won by just over 154,000 votes. That is a very slim margin. So are you worried that what we are seeing unfold because of the president's Israel policies will change 154,000 minds?
Well, look, this election is going to be close, and it's going to be close in Michigan. It's one of the biggest battlegrounds in the country. What we can do is continue to focus on investing and outreach to the communities that will decide this election. We're going to be talking about the full suite of issues that we know that Michiganders go to the ballot box for. Better jobs, a president that treats everybody with dignity, abortion rights. And when we look at the guy that we're likely going to face, who has turned his back on Michiganders, who has attacked elected officials in this state, has instituted a Muslim ban, and is proudly campaigning on it, we're really confident that this is a choice we're going to hammer in with these voters. But again, this work is for November 2024, and it's going to require us earning the support.
Well, we are about to see the first primary votes cast for Joe Biden in South Carolina, and there's a lot of history there. It's a state that gave him an incredible boost back in 2020. We just heard from our correspondent, Nicole Killian, who is there, who spoke with a group of Black pastors who said they weren't sure they were ready to support the president again. And this comes amid some waning support in the Black American community. And I wonder why you think that is and how you're going to address it.
Well, look, I think it was really important and a critical first step by Joe Biden to put South Carolina the first in the calendar. It is long overdue that our party represents and reflects the diversity and the backbone of our party, which is Black and brown voters. So by putting South Carolina at the top of the ticket, it reminds our communities that we aren't taking them for granted. And it's not just this calendar, it's putting in the time, the money, and the investments to show up and earn their support. So this is the first step in building a process that lives our values. We know that South Carolina is an important state. Its demographics reflect a lot of what we need to do in our key battlegrounds. And we're excited to see the results on South Carolina on Saturday, but that's just the first step in this process.
Well, there are a lot more states between now and November, and we hope to see you a lot between now and then. Kevin Munoz, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Rita.
The Biden campaign pushed to move South Carolina up in the presidential primary calendar, as Kevin just said, to give more power to the diverse coalition that helped him clinch the nomination in 2020. We'll discuss if that support is waning with our political panel next. You're streaming America Decides.
My buddy Jim Clyburn, you brought me back. Thanks to all of you, the heart of the Democratic Party, we just won, and we've won big because of you.
Welcome back to America Decides. 4 years ago, overwhelming Black support in South Carolina put Joe Biden on a path towards the presidency. Now the campaign is trying to mobilize Black voters who support for the president is waning. Joel Payne and Ashley Etienne join us now. Joel is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Ashley is also a CBS News political contributor. She previously served as communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Joel, Ashley, great to see you. So what is going on? Why is the support not there like it was in 2020 for Joe Biden in the Black community?
Well, I think we're projecting a bit right now, right? This is in the middle of a tough time in the presidency. Back 4 years ago, I said that the path to the presidency for Democrats ran right through the heart of Black America. And I think Black voters are still the heartbeat of the Democratic Party. I think one thing that's good about Joe Biden is he doesn't have a Johnny-come-lately story to tell. He's been there, whether it was in South Carolina 4 years ago, changing the DNC primary calendar, putting Ketanji Brown Jackson on the Supreme Court. There are so many things that Joe Biden can point to where he can say, I walk the walk. And so I think that's what you're going to see the campaign lean on a lot.
But here's the other challenge. He's got an incredible record, as Joel just rattled off. But the problem is, how is that message actually penetrating the community? Is the community actually receiving that message? And here's what I think the party is missing. I've been in these meetings, private meetings with the party leaders, most recently as a month ago, and I was in the war room in 2020 on Joe Biden's campaign. And I think what we're missing is the fact that disinformation is having an outsized impact on Black people's perceptions of this president and his record, as well as suppressing enthusiasm for the president. And that's something that the party hasn't yet quite figured out how to solve for that issue. I mean, they're dumping a lot of money on television, but that's not where, the disinformation is. It's in our feeds now. So my advice would be, do something bold, go big. The party is run by Black men. I mean, commit to, new resources, to a new program. Find an AI firm, bring on an AI firm so they can tell us in real time where the problem is and how we can solve for that problem. Because otherwise, we're just throwing good money after a bad strategy.
We talk so much about messaging, about strategy, about making sure people know about the policies. But shouldn't they be feeling it in their daily lives? Are there any areas where he hasn't walked the walk, where he hasn't fulfilled campaign promises in this community in particular, that he needs to pay more attention on?
Yeah, I mean, I think two issues come to mind for me. One is voting rights. The president ran on the fact that democracy was in peril and we needed to pass voting rights reform and legislation. That didn't actually happen. The other is police reform, right? We all saw, the whole world came to attention after the death of the murder of George Floyd. And the president and the vice president made commitments around moving legislation and putting their weight behind pushing legislation through the actual Congress. And the president, talked about Tyree Nichols during the State of the Union this past year. And you had Republicans stand up on the other side clapping. And it felt like that was a moment where we could have seized and had some bipartisan action on this really big issue that we know is disproportionately impacting Black people and Black men in particular. And there was no action. So I think that there is some level of disappointment and feeling like, you come into my community in October and you're pandering to me just for my vote, but come January, my issues are no longer your priority.
Well, and I think that's why, you talked about the timing of when you start those appeals. You don't want to start them in October. And I do think, we can talk about
a history of doing in the Democratic Party.
Democrats have done. I think the Biden campaign and really the Biden-Harris administration and the 2020 campaign has made an effort to do that earlier.
Absolutely.
A word that Ashley and I were talking about as we were thinking about how to have this conversation was persuasion. That's the term that's used for how you approach voters. Do you treat them as a persuasion target or a turnout target? Turnout is giving you logistics. Show up on this day, register at this time, and this is the information for how you vote. Persuasion is, why should you vote for me? What's the proactive case for why I've earned your vote and earned your support? And Democrats, Joe Biden, is doing that type of appeal earlier and more frequently and with a lot more urgency than they have really at any time in the modern Democratic Party history. And I think the campaign is counting on that to really buoy them into this cycle.
I mean, that's the benefit of having all these polls, right? There's a recent poll that showed that Joe Biden was down 22 points to Donald Trump with black men. I mean, what the campaign is doing is putting their foot on the gas earlier than they ever had before, and I think we're seeing a lot of good dividends. So it's positive signs, but I think if you don't get at this disinformation that we know is corroding our feeds, it's still going to be a problem in his Achilles heel.
And what about, I'm glad you mentioned the former president, what about the Republican race? Is that going to matter who wins when it comes to Joe Biden persuading black voters to vote for him?
So,
you know, the alternative, is that going to matter?
So look, this is a hard conversation for Democrats to have. Democrats have to be very honest and operate with a lot of clarity about the fact that I think that Donald Trump and Republicans are gaining ground with black voters. Now, what does gaining ground look like? Going from 6% to 8% to maybe 9 or 10%. Not what we've seen in some public polls that are like 20, 30% for African-American support. I think that's unrealistic. But it's clear that the trend lines show that Republicans are making inroads. There are a lot of reasons for that. There's a broad working class, people of color coalition that I think Republicans are targeting this cycle, going after people based on college education, going after geographically where they are. There's a lot of rural black folks that Republicans are targeting. And so I think Democrats have to be smart about countering that and offering a narrative that shows those people that there's room for them within this coalition.
I also think that we made the case to black Americans that democracy was the most important issue going into this last election. And I think if there's no repercussions or if Donald Trump is not held to account, I think it's not going to be as potent of an issue going into this next cycle. And I think that's a problem. It's not just whether or not Republicans are gaining traction going from 6 to 8%. It's how many African Americans or black folks decide to stay home. That's the real question.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because is it about persuasion or is it about just not going?
It's about everything.
It's too early.
It's about everything. It's about investment. It's about energy. You know, I worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016, and you can tell that story in a lot of ways through what happened in Wisconsin. There was a county in Milwaukee, there was a New York Times story about this, that just didn't show up. There was one precinct, and that, frankly, made the difference between the last 6 years of American life that black voters dealt with. Is that one area not showing up, which means that every vote, every precinct, every neighborhood counts, and I think Democrats can't leave any stone unturned.
And what about the vice president? Obviously, you worked for her.
I did.
Is a historical figure. Will she have influence to get voters out in the black community?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that's where I was about to transition now, which is that the party has a lot of advantages. I mean, the party's run, you know, by black men. You know, you've got Hakeem Jeffries, who's running the House. You got Jamie, who's running the DNC, and then you've got the vice president. Yeah, you got Quentin, who's the number 2 on the campaign, first time ever. The head of communications is an African-American male. But then you also have the vice president. So you have a lot of tools in your toolkit, the Democratic Party does, that we can leverage and exploit to drive out, to make the case to black folks, and then to drive out black turnout. So I'm hearing that the vice president, and you know, is doing a lot of meetings at her residence and in her office with black men in particular of great influence, and who are influencers all over the country that can drive and penetrate some of these communities and pockets of the community. And I think they believe that that is sort of the beginnings of what could become an army that could be leveraged to actually go out and drive out turnout, right? Serve as surrogates for the campaign, right? So the work that the president can't do or the vice president can't do, you would have these folks out there talking directly to voters. So she's doing those meetings now, and I think that they think that that's part of the larger strategy to get people engaged and active earlier than ever before. So I think she's going to have an outsized impact. And she's a great asset to the president.
Well, I have many more questions, but we have to leave it there. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Joel Payne, Ashley Etienne. We will see you soon.
All right.
But that does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.